All right. Today, we're going to talk about Jackson's first term. And we talked about the election of 1828 last time, where after all the mudslinging and all of the casting doubt on Jackson's, the legality of Jackson's marriage and all that other stuff is over, Andrew Jackson won the election of 1828 easily, dominates the Electoral College, and really dominated the popular vote too, and is swept into office in 1828. As he got to the awards, the inauguration of Jackson in 1829, people began to move to really be a lot of people in Jackson's party began to try to maneuver themselves into good graces so that Jackson would appoint them to various positions. Okay, and many people are going to be appointed to various positions inside the government, and that is something that we've talked about before. We call it the spoils system. Okay, Jackson's enemies are going to be very cognizant of the fact that they're going to get cut out of many of these positions. If you had opposed Jackson, if you weren't one of Jackson's friends, you're probably not going to get an appointment in the federal government. And so this is one of the new things about political parties. Political parties began to reward people that help you get elected, those people that give you money, those people that help you get elected. They're going to be rewarded. And so you end up with some people being rewarded that probably don't deserve the positions, but that's always a danger. It happens today. Okay? It's nothing new. Politics is politics, and that happens. But the spoils system is something that Jackson and the political parties will begin to use effectively. Remember, Martin Van Buren ran the campaign. Martin Van Buren, senator from New York, ran the campaign. And he, of course, is going to be one of the major players in naming people to these various positions. And so Jackson's enemies sort of characterize this. It's like Satan handing out the goods after winning. So it's not a very pleasant thing to be one of those enemies of Jackson and be turned away. Told you guys that one of the things we got to decide about is whether or not Jackson is a champion of the common man. Okay, this new Jacksonian democracy that's emerging seems to favor farmers, seems to favor Westerners. It certainly is not a favorite of the elites. Okay, Jackson has a big mistrust of a lot of the elites, including bankers. You'll find that out later on. Okay, he's not a big fan of the wealthy or the elites. He is much more in tune with the common man. Think about it. He's a soldier. He is a farmer. He is a Westerner. So he kind of understands those people much more than he does wealthy bankers in the big cities. Okay, and so he is more, like I said, in tune with the common man. He has a huge distrust of big business, of elites, okay, and much more in tune with those people that we would consider to be plain folk, okay. Because of that, those kind of plain folk rallied to Jackson. They're the ones that got him elected in 1828. And they're the ones that flocked to Washington to see Jackson inaugurated in 1829. So people traveled from hundreds of miles away, from the West. They traveled for weeks, some of them, to come to Washington to see their hero inaugurated. Okay? So Andrew Jackson's inauguration was very wild. If you're one of the elites, if you're one of the upper class, and you kind of walked around Washington on the eve of Jackson's inauguration, you would be a little out of place, okay? There are a whole lot of farmers, former soldiers, mountain men that have come from all over the place to see their hero inaugurated. Jackson, really as, I guess, a thank you for all their support, will throw open the grounds of the White House. And the White House becomes the epicenter, really, of the inauguration party. And people flock to the White House. They manage to get into the White House, and a drunken mob begins to party away inside the White House. Okay? It's like every teenage movie you've ever seen where the parents go away and you hold a party and it all goes wrong. Okay? You've got drunken people flopping around everywhere, people stealing stuff. It's a disaster. Okay? The elites, including journalists, will point out that this is kind of unacceptable, all right? That this is the president's house, this is the nation's house, and instead, Jackson has treated it like a palace opened up to king mob, okay? And that he is not what this country needs, okay? So Jackson kind of comes in with this sort of strange opening few days, okay? But once president, you began to see Jackson sort of solidify himself. Now, Jackson is going to surround himself with some interesting people. And he's going to get criticized for it, okay, because of some of the people that he surrounds himself with, okay? All right. There's an official cabinet, and you guys know that the cabinet is those people that Jackson hire or Jackson appoints to be advisors, that are heads of departments, okay? They have to go through the Senate to be approved, okay? And so this is the official cabinet, okay, at Jackson's inauguration. Remember the guy that helped him become president, Martin Van Buren? Take a look at what office he's in, okay? The Secretary of State, okay? And so then he appoints some of these others to their various posts, okay? All right, this is the official cabinet. Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of War, Attorney General, okay, same ones that you are familiar with, okay? But Jackson also surrounded himself with an unofficial cabinet that was referred to by the press as Jackson's kitchen cabinet. And yes, I'm not making that up, okay? I promise that that's what it was called. Jackson's kitchen cabinet was a group of advisors that were Jackson's buddies. Now, the rumor was it was presided over by Martin Van Buren. But a lot of the members were Jackson's war buddies, okay, people that Jackson was friends with, people that helped support him in the election, party members, whatever. People that Jackson could count on for help or count on for guidance or just to count on to be a friend. Now, a lot of people were concerned that this group of people had access to the president and actually had influence over the president, but weren't vetted by the Senate. In other words, they didn't have to go through the process of being appointed or approved by the Senate. And so a lot of people, kind of going back to what I told you about, thought that this was kind of one of those things where maybe they were peddling influence. that Jackson and Van Buren were actually maybe selling access to the president, or were allowing his friends to dictate policy rather than Congress, or rather than official channels. Now, the kitchen cabinet is, a lot of historians today still debate about how much real influence the kitchen cabinet was. There are a lot of historians that think it was really just a bunch of Jackson's friends that got together in the White House kitchen and had coffee, okay, or had a drink and told war stories, okay, that it really was nothing but really a group of Jackson's friends, and that was it. Others saw it as kind of this secretive cabal that could direct national policy without really being a part of the government. But whatever, okay? That's still debated. But in reality, Jackson's unofficial cabinet, Jackson's kitchen cabinet, if you will go on to really create what is part of the White House administration today. There are many offices that surround the President of the United States that are appointed by the President that do not have to have Senate approval. They are part of the White House staff. They have immense power, but are not regulated by the appointment process and are not regulated by the Senate. Today, for example, there are a couple of unofficial, White House appointments that are extremely powerful. The most powerful is the Chief of Staff. Okay, that's not approved by the Senate. If you become president, you have you appoint a Chief of Staff. He's the gatekeeper. She's the gatekeeper, whoever you pick. Okay, they're the ones that set up who has access to the president. Okay, and they are extremely powerful. You have others like Director of National Intelligence or the press secretary even that have tremendous power. Those are all offshoots of Jackson's kitchen cabinet. These are all offshoots of really what Jackson did early on and had these unofficial guys around him. But Andrew Jackson's official cabinet is the one that you see up here, okay? There's one in particular that I'm going to point out. Look at the Secretary of War. Secretary of War is a guy named John Eaton. John Eaton's from Tennessee, which is where Jackson has sort of set up shop as his home now. And he was kind of like a protege of Jackson. Jackson liked him a whole lot. Before being Secretary of War, John Eaton had been elected as a senator from Tennessee. And there is some doubt about whether or not he was even old enough to be elected as a senator. There's some people that believe he didn't meet the age requirement, and Tennessee elected him as a senator anyway. Okay? But now he is Secretary of War. Eaton, kind of as a side, is going to play a big role in something that's about to happen inside of Jackson's administration. Essentially a fight that is going to change and reshape this cabinet. Notice that we get to about 1831, okay? And I want to kind of show you that that's in the middle of the first administration, okay? You get to 1831 or so, okay? You're going to see the cabinet change, okay? And notice how many of these offices began to change, okay? And there's a reason for that. Jackson is essentially going to go to war with part of his cabinet because of an incident that happens. and he is going to purge that cabinet when they don't do what he wants them to do, okay? And he will really change this cabinet often and see how it changes over these next few years into Jackson's second administration. So keep that in mind, okay? So, Andrew Jackson, this hero of the Battle of New Orleans, this champion of the West and champion of democracy and champion of the common man, is now president. And I told you guys that several things start to happen, okay? Now, there are a couple of things that are happening simultaneously. So we've got to kind of deal with several of these that happen right from the get-go. All right, one is called the Peggy Eaton Affair. Okay, the Peggy O'Neill Eaton Affair. Okay, notice that name. Okay, this all revolves around the Secretary of War's wife, Peggy Eaton. The Peggy Eaton Affair should be really a great love story. Okay, so let me tell you the story first, and then we'll talk about the scandal that develops. Okay. All right, John Eaton comes to Washington as the new Secretary of War. And when he's there, he will fall madly in love with a woman named Peggy O'Neill. Now, Peggy O'Neill had how do I say this delicately? A questionable past. Okay? She had been married before. She had some argued, had used her body to sell influence. Okay? But Eaton falls madly in love with her. They have a torrid love affair and end up marrying. Okay? Now, who knows just how questionable her past really was, how much of it was blown out of proportion. But it really sort of did make all of the society pages. Okay? Washington had become a bureaucratic city. And like any bureaucratic city, like Paris or London or whatever, okay, there were people that were trying to get influence in the government. There were society was very high society. You have all these government officials that go to parties, that they're seen, and of course the society pages all report all of the gossip. Okay, and so the Peggy Eaton or the Peggy O'Neill, John Eaton, really love affair and then marriage was big news. Okay, Jackson liked John Eaton. And Jackson really liked Peggy O'Neill, okay? In a lot of ways, he kind of felt like she was sort of like Rachel, his wife, his former wife that had died during the campaign. That she's really a nice person. She really is this wonderful person. But the press and her enemies are attacking her, and it's not fair. Okay? Now, Peggy Eaton, whether she liked it or not, was part of Washington high society now. And so, as part of high society, you had to kind of play that role. You had to go to the teas, you had to go to the dances, you had to show your face. It's all part of official Washington. But the other cabinet wives did not like her. So the wives of many of those cabinet officials that I showed you earlier did not like Peggy O'Neill. Okay? They didn't think that she was of the same stock as them. They, of course, thought They had heard about her questionable past, okay, and all of this other stuff. And so essentially what they did is shun her. They wouldn't invite her to the teas, okay? They wouldn't invite her to the parties. She would try to invite people to their home and they wouldn't come, okay? Now John, being a good husband and being, of course, in love with his wife, is furious, okay? You can't treat my wife like that, right? And he is hot. He goes to see the president about it. Now, whatever Jackson may be, Jackson is famous or infamous for his temper. And I told you that Jackson liked Peggy O'Neill, liked Peggy Eaton. And so Jackson is now pretty hot. Okay? The ringleader of the cabinet wives and the shunning of Peggy O'Neill seems to be the wife of the vice president, John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun's wife. Okay? John C. Calhoun's wife is, or at least she's the vice president's wife. Okay? And so she seems to be hope if I spelled that right. Well, that's not the greatest picture. It'll have to do. All right, so that's her. All right. And yes, I know her name looks like fluoride. Okay, it's not. It's Floride. It's a French name. It's Floride. All right, but anyway, whatever. The wife of the vice president, the wife of the sitting vice president, seems to be the ringleader in shunning Peggy Eaton. Okay? Jackson, like I told you, is furious. And so he calls the vice president in and says, hey, let's talk about your wife. It's very obvious that your wife is running this campaign against Peggy Eaton, and I want it stopped. So you go home and you tell your wife that you are going to play nice, that all of them are going to play nice. They're going to invite Peggy. They're going to make sure that Peggy is accepted and blah, blah, blah. Okay? Well, Calhoun is now furious. I'm not telling my wife that. If you can go talk, but we're not gonna, she's her own person. I have nothing to do with this. Jackson's furious, okay? And so a rift develops, a big one, between those members of the cabinet that refuse to really take in Peggy O'Neill, okay, and those that kind of sided with Jackson. There was one person, okay, there was one person that that did accept Peggy O'Neill, Peggy Eaton, that always made sure that Peggy was where she was supposed to be, was always willing to dance with her, was always willing to show her a lot of respect. Anybody want to know? Anybody take a guess who it is? The only bachelor on that cabinet, Martin Van Buren. So Van Buren was always willing to show Peggy O'Neill, Peggy Eaton, a lot of courtesy. And of course, that puts him way up in Jackson's book. Okay? So let me give you a couple of examples. Who's going to survive the cabinet purge? Martin Van Buren. Who is going to become the next vice president of the United States after John C. Calhoun is going to resign over some of this? Martin Van Buren. Who will be elected the next president after Jackson retires after 2 terms? Martin Van Buren. So, moral to the story is what? Sometimes it's nice to play nice, okay? Sometimes doing the right thing gets you a lot more than maybe doing the wrong thing. Marszalek, the historian Marszalek, talks about the Eaton affair, okay? And talks about why she really wasn't accepted, okay? Peggy O'Neill was outspoken. She was a strong woman, and the other women didn't like that. And they felt like she sort of didn't know her place, okay? And because she was strong and outspoken and had opinions and didn't really sort of stay in the shadow of her husband, all right, that was unacceptable to many of them, okay? So, notice the result of this, okay? Notice the result of this. All but one cabinet member will resign in 1831. Who's the one cabinet member that didn't resign? Martin Van Buren. Okay? So, Jackson has really gone to war with his own cabinet over Peggy Eaton, and the result is he's driven everybody except the one that he likes out. Okay? It destroys the relationship between John C. Calhoun and Andrew Jackson. Calhoun will resign from the vice presidency, will return to South Carolina, and will become the senator from South Carolina. Okay? And so that's why you have all of those cabinet changes that we talked about. Okay? Everything changes after 1831. Now, I want to take a time out here, okay? And I want to tell you about some other historiography that sort of surrounds the Peggy Eaton affair. We know from the Peggy Eaton affair that Jackson is going to drive out Calhoun. Okay, they will be permanent, bitter enemies really after this. Okay, they do not like each other. Calhoun is going to go back home to South Carolina. There are some historians, okay, and I'm going to kind of tell you, this is a long arc, okay, this is we were playing a football game, this is a last-ditch desperation Hail Mary, okay, from your own 20-yard line kind of play. But some historians believe that you can trace the beginnings of the Civil War to right here. Because when Calhoun is driven out of the cabinet and is driven out of official Washington by Jackson, he goes home to South Carolina where he becomes an outspoken supporter of states' rights, of slavery, of nullification, which is the next big controversy we have to get into. Okay? That Calhoun, because he is driven out of Washington, becomes the Southern champion for states' rights, for slavery's expansion, for slavery's remaining in the South, for nullification, all of those things, for sectionalism, for all of those things that are eventually going to split the country. So the flip side of this argument is, what if Peggy Eaton doesn't happen? Okay? What if Calhoun remained in the cabinet and had been forced really to make a decision about some of his beliefs? That instead of driving him out and driving him back to South Carolina, where he becomes this very bitter champion of states' rights, and eventually of sectionalism, and eventually of secession, that maybe, just maybe, by keeping him in the cabinet and then maybe letting him run for president or stay inside the government, that instead he could have found a way to moderate and to not push the South towards the brink. It's a long shot, but it does make you think. And remember, I told you that really ever since the Missouri Compromise, ever since really we're 10 years from the Missouri Compromise, okay? And you have a cabinet war over Peggy Eaton, of all things, for God's sakes, that we can trace slavery to, that we can make a legitimate discussion about how this can impact and eventually be traced to the Civil War. That's how dominant slavery and this drive towards eventually the Civil War has become, okay? The other big crisis of Jackson's first administration is this, the nullification issue, okay? And a lot of you look at this and you go, what the hell is nullification, okay? Well, it's easy. You already know what it is. You're just not exactly familiar with this term. The nullification issue centers around one thing, the Tariff of 1828, the Tariff of Abomination, as the South called it. In 1828, under Adams, the tariff had been raised to a very high level, and the South hated it. They despised it, and they had begun a big crusade against the tariff of 1828. All right, here's where you got to think a little bit, okay? The origins of the nullification issue go all the way back to the Alien and Sedition Acts. What happens if Congress passes a law and the president signs it and we think it's unconstitutional? Well, Jefferson and Madison had said in the Virginia and Kentucky Resolves that the states had the right to nullify, to say it was unconstitutional. Now, in the meantime, because of Marbury versus Madison, all of you remember that, right? Because of Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court has taken over that power, right? That the Supreme Court can decide whether or not a law passed by Congress, signed by the president, is actually unconstitutional. But the Tariff of 1828 has forced many of the southern states to take up this issue again because they hate it. Now, technically, there's nothing wrong with the constitutionality of the tariff. They know that. Okay? Congress has the power to make tariffs. We all know that according to the Constitution. So the states have decided to take up the old nullification issue, especially South Carolina. South Carolina is going to push the envelope here. And they hate the tariff so much that they are threatening to nullify the tariff, okay? All right, so the tariff conflict is growing, okay? And really, South Carolina is brewing about this. Now, we won't get proposals for a new tariff until 1832, okay? So in the meantime, this brouhaha is growing. South Carolina and some of the other states too, but especially South Carolina, is furious about this tariff. And their argument is that it should be declared unconstitutional, that they are going to nullify it if the federal government doesn't take up a new tariff policy, which it won't until 1832. Okay? So keep that in mind. Everybody with me? The tariff issue is a big deal. The South wants it changed. The government, the federal government may not be so reticent to do that, though, because you got to understand that it's a moneymaker. All right. In 1830, things are really heating up. In Congress and in the Senate, there's a debate, for example, going on in the Senate called the Webster-Hayne debate, okay? Notice who it is, okay? Daniel Webster, one of the great triumvirate, one of the greatest senators in American history, is debating Robert Hayne from South Carolina. And one of the things they're debating is the constitutionality of the tariff, but really, big picture-wise, they're talking about states' rights. What Webster and Hayne are debating about in the Senate is whether or not a state has the right to ignore a law passed by the government. Behind all of this, and really behind this debate, some of this debate, is the vice president. Now notice, this is all happening in 1829, well, it's 1830 or so. And so Calhoun hasn't resigned yet. So the Webster-Hayne debate is going on. And South Carolina is hearkening back to those old ideas that came out of the Virginia and Kentucky resolves, that states have the right to ignore federal law if they felt it was unconstitutional. Now, John C. Calhoun is pushing this argument, but he can't really do it openly because he's the Vice President of the United States, okay? But he pretty much wants to make everybody know where he stands, okay? Very quietly, during this time, a document is going to appear, written anonymously. It's called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest, okay? It will be written anonymously by Calhoun. Let's take a look at it. So, notice when it was written, 1828. This goes right back to the beginning, okay? And notice what it's all about. It's about the tariff, okay? It is about the tariff. Calhoun argues the tariff of 1828 is unconstitutional, okay? And in this paragraph, he outlines everything you need to know, okay? Essentially, what he is talking about, okay, it is impossible to deny the states the right of deciding on the infractions of their powers and the proper remedy to be applied for their correction. The right of judging in such cases is an essential attribute of sovereignty of which the states cannot be divested without losing their sovereignty itself, being reduced to a subordinate corporate condition. All right, so essentially what he is saying is that the states are sovereign and that the states are all part of a union, okay? that if the states can't decide matters like this, they lose their sovereignty. This is why it's called states' rights. Does that make sense? All right. Essentially, what Calhoun is saying is that the federal government forcing the state to, or the states to accept this, denies them their essential being. Okay? So the states ought to have the right to determine for themselves whether or not the laws passed by Congress are constitutional. Oh boy. Now this is the sitting vice president, okay, who is essentially, in this document, pushing the ability of the states to declare laws unconstitutional. Does that make sense? No one really knows, as this heats up, no one really knows where Jackson stands on this issue. Okay? Jackson is technically a Southerner. Jackson is technically a Westerner. Okay? Jackson probably comes from an area that does not necessarily like the tariff. And so, no one really exactly knows where the president stands on this. Okay? And so, as everything starts to heat up, you've got the South Carolina Exposition and Protest that comes out. Then you've got the Webster-Hayne debate that essentially debates whether or not this is legitimate. Okay? You get to 1830, okay? And the government, it seems like, is divided. Calhoun comes up with a plan to try to smoke Jackson out, to try to make him take a stand on this tariff issue. And it all happens at the Jefferson Day dinner in 1830. There's a huge party in Washington that celebrates Jefferson's birthday. And one of the highlights of the evening are the toasts made by various people. And Calhoun kind of dreamed up this idea that the toast would build to kind of this crescendo where he would toast essentially the idea of states' rights and force Jackson in his toast later in the evening to really make a decision about this. Okay? This is all politics. It's all playing politics. It's all playing with society. Martin Van Buren gets wind of it and tells the president, hey, this is what's going to happen. Okay? And so Jackson decides to take a stand. Okay? Now Daniel Webster, during the toasts had made a toast that said, liberty and the Union now and forever, one and inseparable. Jackson rose before really most thought he would and made a statement. A very simple toast. Our federal union. It must be preserved. Now, Calhoun has lost his thunder. Still makes his toast, the union next to our liberty, talking about states, most dear. So think about what's happening here. What Jackson has said is that he is going to support the Constitution, that he is going to support the Union, that he believes the national government is stronger than the states, and that the states cannot decide for themselves these kinds of issues. That federal sovereignty reigns supreme. What the federal government says goes. So he's taking a stand. If South Carolina pushes this, it's pretty clear that Jackson says it must be preserved. He is the chief executive. He is the executive officer. His duty is to enforce the law. If South Carolina does not abide by the law, what will Jackson do? He will enforce it. So you have reached a crisis point. Remember, Jackson forces out most of the cabinet the next year. Calhoun resigns. And so we are at a crisis point, okay, as we get to 1832. 1832 is an election year, okay? And so the tariff, once again, is going to become a big issue. And South Carolina seems to have made it pretty clear that if the tariff issue isn't taken up and the tariff isn't lowered, they're going to nullify it and perhaps even leave the Union. There is talk of nullification and there is talk of secession. And it's the first time we start to deal with those issues. All right, we'll stop there, okay? And we'll pick this up. Friday's lecture will take us through the nullification issue and through Jackson's second term, okay? Jackson's second term is about Indian affairs. There's a lot of things that go on, okay? So I'll take you through that in the lecture for Friday, okay? All right, see you guys.